When we talk about medicine, many people imagine numbers, diagnoses, medications, and protocols. But for those who wear the white coat and spend hours inside a hospital, the reality is far more complex. Behind every beeping monitor, behind every medical record filled with technical terms, there's a life story. And sometimes a story that challenges everything we learned in medical school. My name is Ricardo. I've worked in hospitals for more than 2 decades, during endless shifts and in situations where a single minute can decide someone's fate. I learned from my mentors that medicine demands technique, but it also demands humanity. Because when we step into an ICU, we don't just deal with organs and lab results. We deal with dreams, families, fears, and hopes. Over time, I realized that there are events that simply don't fit into the pages of a medical book, situations where, according to all the logic we follow, the outcome should be one thing. And yet, against all odds, another outcome happens. It's as if, for a few moments, life slips out of our hands and manifests on its own in a dimension we cannot measure. Today, I want to share one of those stories with you. It isn't just another clinical case. It's one of those episodes that make any healthcare professional stop, take a deep breath, and admit there is something beyond what we can control. This account doesn't come to replace science, but to remind us that science, as vast as it is, cannot embrace all the mysteries of existence. And I can guarantee you what you're about to hear is not a legend, not an invention. It is the faithful account of an event that took place in the ICU in front of an entire medical team. A story that begins like so many others. A critical patient, monitored, surrounded by tubes, wires, and machines, and ends in a way that still echoes in my memory. Picture this with me. A silent hospital, only the intermittent beeping of monitors cutting through the air. The team, exhausted, yet alert. Suddenly, the vital signs of a patient disappear. Protocols are activated, procedures, medications, everything science teaches is applied with precision. But in the end, the conclusion seems inevitable. There is no more life here. And it was at that exact moment that something happened. Something not found in textbooks, something that didn't follow any known logic. And that's what I'll tell you about throughout this video. If you've been following me, you know I tend to open my heart here, not for sensationalism, but because I believe stories like this must be recorded and shared. They don't belong to me alone. They belong to all of us who seek to understand what it truly means to be alive. In medicine, we're taught to accept that there are limits. There's a moment when the body simply no longer responds, when the vital signs vanish from the monitor screen, and the flat line shows what none of us ever want to see. As a doctor, I've been present at that moment, many times. Each time is painful, each time is final, or at least it should be. That night, inside the ICU, my team and I witnessed a case that seemed to have reached exactly that point. The end. Everything was right before us. Protocols followed, attempts exhausted, a battle that apparently could no longer be won. We declared the absence of life, but it was precisely at that moment that the unexpected occurred. I will tell you every detail of this story, but before that, I need to make a sincere request. This channel only grows because you interact. If you believe miracles can happen, write in the comments right now, "I believe in miracles." This isn't just a phrase, it's a chain of faith, hope, and energy that connects everyone watching. And beyond that, it helps YouTube share this video with more people who need to hear messages like this. My goal is to reach at least 100 comments on this video, and I'm counting on you to make that possible. Also, subscribe to the channel, because here I share real hospital stories that touch the heart, stories that remind us that life is much more than tests, machines, and statistics. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next episodes. You'll see that each one brings not only emotion, but also deep reflections on what it means to be alive. Now, back to the story. The atmosphere was heavy in that ICU. Silence filled the air. the kind that seems to cut through everything. The family waited for news outside, while, inside the room, we all carried the bitter sense that there was nothing more to be done. The patient lay motionless, and his vital signs had completely disappeared. It was the kind of scene that forces us to confront our own fragility as human beings. Except that night, the ending didn't follow the usual script, and that's what makes this story so special. I could say it was luck, I could call it coincidence, but the truth is that there isn't a single medical term that can explain what we witnessed, and that's why I need you to stay with me until the end of this video, because what began as a story of loss ended as one of the most unforgettable moments of my career. A moment when science had no answers, but life decided to write a new page. Are you ready to hear what happened in that ICU? Then sit back, because from now on, we'll walk through this story together. Every detail matters. Every second of this story might change the way you see life, medicine, and even faith. The impatient I'm going to introduce here wasn't just a number on a chart. To protect his identity, I'll call him Carlos. He was 52 years old, married, father of 2 teenagers, and known by everyone as a hard-working man who always put his family first. The kind of person who didn't give up easily. Those who knew him said his laugh was loud and contagious, and that his presence filled rooms with life. But that night, the picture was very different. Instead of being surrounded by his family at home, Carlos was lying in an ICU bed, connected to monitors, surrounded by a medical team fighting to stabilize his signs. He had been rushed to the hospital after a sudden collapse caused by a severe cardiac complication. His family came with him, distressed, unable to understand how a seemingly healthy man could, in just a few hours, become a critical patient. When we received Carlos, the situation was already delicate. He arrived unconscious, with an irregular heartbeat and blood pressure plummeting. Protocols were immediately initiated. Medications, oxygen, IV access, rapid tests. The team worked in perfect sync, each person knowing exactly what needed to be done. But despite all efforts, the instability continued. It was as if his body was fighting an invisible internal battle, silently, without respite. Outside the ICU, his wife waited for updates. Her eyes were red, not only from crying, but from sheer disbelief. She repeated phrases like, "He was fine yesterday. This doesn't make sense." The children, stunned, tried to find some hope in the words of the nursing staff. To them, their father was a pillar. To us, in that moment, he was a patient challenging us to fight against time. Meanwhile, inside the room, I watched the monitor at the bedside. Every number there represented not just clinical data, but the thin line between life and death. Every drop in pressure, every pause in heartbeat echoed in the hearts of the entire team. Doctors learn to remain cold in these situations, but the truth is, no one is immune. Every patient is a human being, with stories, with connections, with someone waiting outside. Carlos had undergone minor surgeries in the past, but nothing that pointed to such a critical condition. Previous exams had not shown major risks. What happened to him that night was sudden, unexpected, and devastating. In medicine, we use the word shock to define a condition where the body loses its ability to remain stable. And that's exactly what we were seeing, a profound shock, advancing rapidly, leaving no room for error. Time seemed to run at a different pace. Minutes inside the ICU felt like hours to those involved. Every move needed to be fast but precise. One mistake could cost a life. And even with all our knowledge and experience, there was a bitter sense that we were losing this battle. At that moment, medicine showed its harshest face. It didn't matter that Carlos was a strong, devoted, loved man. Inside that room, he was a fragile body, fighting against something greater than any of us could see. And for his family, waiting outside the door, the clock seemed frozen, trapped between the anguish of waiting and the hope for good news. That was the initial reality we faced. A man in the prime of his life, torn from his routine by a sudden collapse, dependent on science and the strength of the team working tirelessly around him. It was the beginning of a story that, at that moment, seemed headed toward the worst possible outcome. The night dragged on slowly, and inside the ICU the tension was absolute. Carlos's heart monitor beeped irregularly, each sound weaker than the last. We had already given the most powerful drugs to stabilize his blood pressure, and still the numbers kept falling. The attempts to maintain his heart rhythm were failing, one after another. It was like watching a flame about to be extinguished. His heart, which had beat strongly and steadily for 52 years, now faltered, fighting against the coming darkness. With every pause in the rhythm, a heavy silence filled the room. Nurses exchanged quick glances, anesthesiologists adjusted machines, and I, as the lead doctor, had to decide every second what the next maneuver would be. In moments like this, there is no room for hesitation. The mind must stay cold, but the heart insists on feeling. I knew that if we lost precious seconds, we might lose any chance to reverse the situation. So we pressed on. Chest compressions, defibrillation, repeated doses of medication. His body gave minimal reactions, almost imperceptible, as if whispering, "I'm still here, but I don't know for how long." Outside, the family waited. Protocol dictates that someone periodically updates the relatives, but in critical situations like this, every piece of news feels like a sentence. I knew that at any moment I would have to step out and face Carlos's wife, explaining that we were doing everything possible, but that his condition was extremely grave. Yet inside me I fought against that possibility. The minutes went by, and the vital signs reached their limit. The monitor's tracing had nearly disappeared. The body no longer responded as before. There came a moment when all of us, seasoned professionals, felt that heavy weight in our chests, the realization that it might be time to stop. It's hard to explain to someone who has never been inside an ICU, but there is a moment when the team understands there is no way back. It's when medicine has exhausted its resources, and life itself seems to have made a decision independent of our will. His blood pressure dropped to 0. The oximeter no longer detected oxygen saturation. The electrocardiogram showed a straight, continuous line with no sign of electrical activity. That flat line every doctor dreads to see, that silence from the monitor that sounds louder than any scream. I looked at the team. Some already dropped their shoulders, exhausted, aware we had reached the end. One of the nurses took a deep breath and asked me, almost in a whisper, "Doctor, do we stop?" This is one of the hardest questions to answer, because it isn't only technical, it's human. Stopping means admitting defeat. It means accepting that the patient isn't coming back. It means, in the end, telling a family that hug, that look, that voice will no longer be there. I took a deep breath, looked at the clock on the wall, and said the words no doctor likes to pronounce. Time of death, 3:17 a.m. The silence that followed was devastating. Some stepped back, others began shutting off machines. It was standard procedure, stopping medications, suspending ventilation, preparing documentation. Life, up to that point, had slipped through our hands. But something inside me refused to accept it. Maybe it was the bond I had already formed with Carlos's story. Maybe it was just that silent voice every doctor carries, the one that sometimes asks you to try one more time. Remained at his side, looking at that motionless body, feeling the weight of defeat, but also something I couldn't explain. A sensation that this was not yet the end. At that moment, medicine had done everything it could. The protocol had been followed. Logic said it was time to stop, but life, as I had learned so many times before, does not follow predictable scripts. The scene was over. The monitor displayed a flat, cold, definitive line. The team was already dispersing, each one performing their task, recording, disconnecting, preparing the body. I stayed still, staring at Carlos, as if there was still something left to say, something left to do. An unease stirred within me that I couldn't explain. Suddenly a sound broke the silence. It was so brief that some didn't even notice. A single beep lost in the middle of that flat line. I frowned, moved closer to the monitor, and for a second I thought it was just an artifact, a machine error. But before I could say anything, another beep appeared. All eyes turned instantly to the screen. The nurse, who was already stopping the medications, froze. The resident, who was filling out the paperwork, raised his head with a look of disbelief. The impossible was right before us. The flat line was beginning to move. At first, timid little waves, almost invisible. Then, a more defined tracing, though still irregular. Carlos's heart, which just seconds earlier had been declared lifeless, was beginning to show signs again. Slowly but firmly, the electrocardiogram started to draw heartbeats once more. No one moved. It was as if time had stopped. Silent glances crossed the room, unable to believe what we were seeing. I, with more than 20 years of experience, used to statistics, protocols, and evidence, found no explanation. Nothing we had done justified that return. There was no medication active, no external stimulus at that moment. And yet, the heart was beating. "Doctor, is this real?" the nurse asked, her voice breaking. I didn't answer right away. I watched for a few more seconds. The heart rate was gradually increasing, irregular, but present. The oximeter, which had been blank until then, began to pick up low oxygen levels. Carlos's body, motionless for minutes, was showing signs of coming back. It was like watching someone come back from nothing, as if life itself had decided on its own to return to that body. There was no denying it. We were witnessing something that escaped all medical logic. The atmosphere in the ICU, which had been heavy and silent, shifted into a strange mix of shock and hope. Some stepped back, others leaned in closer to confirm what they were seeing. No one dared break the moment with words. It was as if everyone knew instinctively that they were witnessing something rare, something that couldn't be explained, only felt. The clock showed just minutes past the official time of death, and yet it felt like time had folded in on itself, as if we had been witnesses to a gap between two worlds, a moment where Carlos had crossed into death and somehow returned. My medical mind screamed for an explanation. I wanted to rationalize, to find some physiological reason that justified what was happening. But at the same time, my heart knew this was beyond science. It was impossible not to recognize the extraordinary nature of what we were living through. Carlos remained unconscious, but alive. His heart was beating. The machines were registering signals again. His body still fragile but responding. The team, who had just accepted defeat, now mobilized again, as if given a second chance. And deep down, that's exactly what it was. A second chance. I won't reveal yet how this story ended. What matters here is that, in that moment, the impossible happened before our eyes. A patient declared dead spontaneously returned to life, without intervention. It was the kind of event that splits a career into before and after. And I want you to think with me. What would you have done in my place, in a scene like that? Would you still believe only in probabilities, or would you admit that there are things that simply cannot be explained? After that night, I never looked at an ICU monitor the same way again. That tracing that came back to life before my eyes taught me something no manual, no conference, no scientific article could ever teach. I already knew medicine had limits, but seeing those limits crossed by something unexplainable is another matter. It's the kind of experience that changes you from within. As a doctor, I was trained to trust numbers, statistics, and protocols, to rely on lab tests and CT scans, to analyze the biochemistry of the human body like solving a complex equation. And all of that is indeed essential. Medicine saves millions of lives because science exists, because studies exist, because professionals dedicate themselves to following proven protocols. But there are moments when all of that seems small in the face of life's mystery. Moments when, Even after following every step correctly, the answer doesn't come from what we can control. And that's exactly what we lived with Carlos, declared lifeless. And yet, for reasons I still cannot explain, he began to breathe again. His heart beat again, showing us that the impossible can happen. I'm not saying here that we should abandon science. On the contrary, without science, Carlos wouldn't have made it that far, wouldn't have received support, wouldn't have had the chance to fight. But what happened went beyond any scientific explanation. It was as if there were an invisible force, a higher decision that simply declared, it's not time yet. This case was engraved in the memory of the entire team. Experienced doctors, used to the harshness of the ICU, looked at each other in silence, speechless. Some called it coincidence. Others called it a miracle. I prefer to let each person give it the name they want. What matters is recognizing that at certain moments we are nothing more than spectators to something far beyond our understanding. And that was when the ICU door opened. Carlos's wife came in, accompanied by a hospital psychologist. It was protocol. In cases of death, the family is called for recognition and support. But this time, the scene had changed. She entered expecting to hear the words no spouse ever wants to hear. But instead, she found something different. I approached her carefully and explained, Mrs. Maria, we need to be clear. Your husband was without vital signs, but see now he is reacting. It took her several seconds to process those words. Her face, disfigured from crying, shifted into a mix of shock and hope. The tears kept flowing, but they weren't the same. Now there was something new, a sparkle in her eyes, reborn with the possibility that she had not lost the partner of her entire life. The children, called in shortly after, embraced each other in disbelief. For them, the last news had been devastating. Their father hadn't made it, and now, suddenly, the story had changed. The emotional confusion was overwhelming, but also transformative. Through sobs, they repeated, "He's strong. He didn't give up." And I, as the doctor, found myself at a crossroads. Technically, there was no plausible explanation. We couldn't guarantee any progress. We couldn't promise stability. But it was impossible to ignore what stood before us. A patient who, after being declared dead, had spontaneously returned. The hours that followed were filled with intense monitoring. Every fluctuation in the heartbeat was followed with tension. The team rotated shifts so that no detail would be missed. It was as if everyone needed reassurance that they weren't dreaming. And with every passing minute, the conviction grew. What we had witnessed that night was real. And it was at that point I realized something profound. This wasn't only about Carlos. This wasn't only about medicine. It was about all of us, about how on the edge between life and death we are confronted with the fragility of existence, but also with the mysterious force that insists on surprising us. In the daily routine of a hospital, especially in an ICU, life and death walk side by side every single day. The team learns to face loss, to handle pressure, and to maintain the coldness necessary to make quick decisions. But some situations break through that barrier. What happened with Carlos was one of them. For days, the case remained the subject of conversations in the hallways. Nurses whispered about it to each other. Residents exchanged astonished glances. Senior doctors revisited the case as if they wanted to examine every detail again. It was as if everyone instinctively knew they had been witnesses to something beyond the ordinary. The impact on the team was deep. The head nurse, who almost never allowed herself to show emotions, later confessed that when she saw the heartbeats reappear on the monitor, she felt as though she had been given a lesson in humility. We think we know everything, doctor, but life always finds a way to remind us we are not in total control. The resident, on the other hand, couldn't hide his excitement. He repeated to everyone that this would be the case he'd tell for the rest of his life, a milestone at the very start of his career. He said, "It's like I finally understood what being a doctor really means. It's not just about technique. It's about standing before the unexplainable. For the family, the impact was even more overwhelming, but in a positive way. Carlos's wife, who had already felt the crushing weight of imminent loss, now clung with all her strength to this second chance. In her words, it was like dying and being reborn in the same day. She attended every visit with eyes full of hope, as if every minute by her husband's side was a gift she could not waste. The children, still teenagers, went through an intense emotional transformation. Instead of remembering that day as the worst of their lives, they began to see it as a miracle that had brought the family closer together. They hugged their father, even unconscious, speaking words of encouragement, believing he could hear them. Even the patients in the neighboring ward sensed that something extraordinary had happened. In a hospital, news travels fast. Some relatives of other patients approached the staff, asking if it was true that a man had come back to life after being declared without vital sign. The corridors carried a different atmosphere, as if a breath of hope had spread beyond the ICU. For me, as a doctor, the impact was personal and profound. I had witnessed surprising recoveries before, but never anything like this. I spent sleepless nights mentally retracing every step, every decision, trying to find a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about technique. It was about something beyond the reach of science. This case also brought important reflections for all of us working on the front lines of healthcare. We were reminded that behind the protocols and machines, there are mysteries we cannot control. We were reminded that medicine is powerful, but not absolute. And most of all, we were reminded that life is a gift, one that sometimes insists on staying even when it seemed it had faded away. The human impact was so strong that some colleagues began to change small attitudes in their daily work. Some started treating every patient with greater gentleness, as if there were no such thing as a routine case. Others began reflecting more on spirituality, on faith, on what connects us to something greater. In the end, all of us walked away changed by that experience. Medicine continued, shifts went on, new patients arrived, but there was a new awareness, a new understanding. The memory of Carlos followed us like a lit flame, reminding us that even in the darkest places, life can show itself in unexpected ways. Stories like Carlos's don't stay confined within the walls of an ICU. They echo far beyond the hospital because they carry a universal reminder. Life does not fit neatly into boxes, protocols, or statistics. No matter how fast science advances, no matter how precise technology becomes, there will always be spaces that only mystery can fill. And maybe that's exactly what makes us human, recognizing that we don't have all the answers. In medical school, we're taught to trust biology, chemistry, the exact mathematics of the human body. But when a patient declared dead begins to breathe spontaneously again, we are forced to admit there are forces we cannot measure. But you see, this message isn't only for doctors, nurses, or healthcare professionals. It's for all of us, because every person at some point in life has faced moments where everything seemed over, when the door closed, when hope disappeared, when it felt like there was no way forward. And yet, something unexpected happened. Maybe it was a job offer that came when every attempt had failed. Maybe it was reconciliation with someone you thought you'd lost forever. Maybe it was a healing no test results predicted. All of us, in some way, have lived through the return of the heartbeat in our own stories. That's why, when I remember Carlos's case, I don't think only of medicine. I think of how life insists on surprising us. I think of how despair can turn into hope at the most improbable moment. I think of how, even in the face of a flat line, there can still be movement. I know many of you listening right now may be going through something difficult. Maybe a silent struggle with illness, maybe family problems, maybe pain no one else sees. Maybe you've even been told there's no way. But if Carlos's story teaches us anything, it's that we should never underestimate the force of life. It doesn't matter what you believe, Some call it a miracle, others coincidence, others destiny. The name doesn't matter. What matters is the impact experiences like this leave on us. The reminder that life is stronger than we think, that hope can be reborn the moment everything seems lost. Carlos's story also reminds us of something essential. Every heartbeat matters. Every breath is precious. We live as if tomorrow were guaranteed, but it isn't. And maybe the greatest miracle of all is simply waking up each day and having the chance to start again. As a doctor, I still believe in science, but I've learned to make room inside myself for something beyond it. Maybe it's faith, maybe it's simply the humility of admitting we are not the owners of life, only its temporary guardians. And that is the message I want to leave you with today. Don't give up before it's time. Don't accept the flat line as the final sentence, because just as it happened with Carlos, life can surprise you in ways you could never imagine. If you've followed this story until now, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's not easy to listen to accounts like this, stories that mix pain, hope, and mystery. But that's exactly what makes this experience so powerful. It reminds us that life is fragile, but also astonishingly resilient. Carlos's case marked my career forever, not only because he began to show vital signs again when there was no medical explanation left, but because this event taught me something essential. Life can always write a chapter we don't expect. And that's what I want you to take with you after this video. When everything seems lost, when the flat line has already appeared on the monitor of your life, remember that there can still be a breath, a movement, a sign that changes the entire story. Never underestimate the strength of a new beginning. Now I need your help. For this channel to keep growing and for more people to receive messages like this, I need you to subscribe down below. Click the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like. This tells YouTube that this content matters and helps it reach others who also need to hear it. And more than that, I want to launch a challenge. If you believe miracles happen, write in the comments, "I will not give up on life." I want to see that phrase spread across all the comments, creating a chain of hope and strength. Each comment is like one more heartbeat, reminding us that we are alive and connected. But don't be mistaken, this isn't the only story that will move you. There are other accounts I've lived through in hospitals, experiences that defy logic and will make you reflect on life's mysteries. And I've already prepared the next video especially for you. I won't reveal the theme now, but I can guarantee this. It's a story just as powerful as this one, and it will hold you from start to finish. So when this video ends, click on the one that appears on your screen. You won't be able to watch it without feeling chills. Life is full of unanswered questions, and here on this channel, we walk together in search of the stories that remind us that simply being alive is, in itself, a miracle. Thank you so much for being with me until the end. And never forget, every heartbeat matters, every breath counts, and every day can be a new beginning.